Well, thanks very much, and thanks, Brad, for that introduction. As Brad mentioned, I worked on the World Development Report on service delivery, where we did make the point that one of the critical ingredients for improving, well, we made 2 points. One was how dysfunctional basic services are, particularly for poor people in developing countries. And secondly, in order to improve it, it's not a technical fix, but it has to do with empowering poor people as beneficiaries to be able to hold service providers and politicians accountable for the effective delivery of services. And, since then, there's been quite a lot of work done in this area. And which I think is partly reflected in some of the discussions here. What I thought I would do, though, is maybe take a slightly different tack and talk about some of the criticisms of this approach. Because it's easy for all of us to reach agreement, and I think you said there was some agreement that giving information out to poor people is good. More data is better than less data. And this is an important way of empowering poor people. And as I said, I've I've gone on record to say that's true. But nevertheless, I thought I would share with you sort of 4, I think, important criticisms of this body of work that, and then give you my take on them. And maybe that can reach have a discussion around it. The first is that, giving information about poor service delivery to poor people is not news to them, right? Right? People, they know that the teacher is not there in the school, right? They know there are no drugs in the clinic. So what do you think about giving this information to them? We go out there and do a $100,000 research project, collect this data, and tell them what they already knew. I think it's a perfectly fair point. But I think we have to understand that what a single poor person knows is different from them knowing what everybody else knows. My experience has been that I did a village immersion program in Gujarat, living with a poor woman and working with her and everything else. And, in there, too, the doctor is never at the clinic. And I asked her, why do you think the doctor is not at the clinic? And she said, it's because the rains didn't come this year. A lot of it is associated with just life is terrible when you're poor, and this is just one other feature of life. Whereas I think what we can do by giving out the systematic data is pointing out that this is actually a systematic failure of government. And not just that because the rains didn't come. I think the experience with the Bangalore report cards, I don't know whether that was mentioned earlier today, which is one of the earliest attempts at giving these report cards on service delivery in different neighborhoods in Bangalore, showed that it was only after, again, those poor people knew exactly that services were bad. When there's no water in your water pipes. You don't need some researcher to come tell you that. But they didn't know was that there was no water in several neighborhoods except the neighborhood where the local council member was from. And that information actually is salient at this point. I'll come back to that in a minute. Now, the second criticism, which in a sense contradicts the first, is to say, well, poor people don't have the capacity to absorb this information. Remember, the first one was they already know it. But then we say, no. But they even if you give it to them, they don't know how to absorb it. Or they're illiterate and they're unable to absorb it. And there's some validity to that. Think about it. If you're working 12 hours a day in the field and you come home and then you expect them to go to some town meeting to learn about the problems of your community, that's a 15-hour day all of a sudden as well, and still trying to make ends meet and trying to keep your family together. But there too, I think we completely misunderstand what goes on, because there's now quite a lot of evidence that illiterate poor people know more about whether their children are learning to read or write in school than literate parents do. Right? It's really amazing when you think about it, it makes sense, because if you're poor, if you're illiterate, you care a lot about making sure your kid learns to read. And those parents are monitoring every day whether the kid actually comes home having learned something. And, there's a famous experiment in Recurso, called Recurso in Peru, where they actually the way they tested to see whether the children were learning was that they sent the kid home with a paragraph and told the parents, you make sure that the kid can read this paragraph in a minute, a 50-word paragraph in a minute. And you found huge take-up among illiterate parents. They would daily monitor the kids' performance. So I think we underestimate the capacity of these people, because they really are hungry for this information, because it really matters to them. And now, again, having said, and then there are all these experiences with the clinic report cards in Uganda, and the public expenditure tracking surveys in Uganda as well, and elsewhere, where getting this information out actually enables poor people to bring pressure to bear on the system, that then in turn has led to some improvements. But let me just end by saying that also, economists also like to romanticize information, right? I mean, we make our living on information, so we go around and sort of promote these ideas. And then there was a sobering experiment in India, in Uttar Pradesh, where there was a village education committee that actually got money from the government that parents could use, or the community could use, to buy extra materials or even hire extra teachers to make the school function. And this village education committee had been in place for 10 years. And we found that there wasn't much happening, despite. So they did a survey 10 years after it had been in existence in the community. And they found that 93% of the people had never heard of the village education committee, even after it had been in existence for 10 years. Of the remaining 7%, this is even more disturbing, something like 5%, or about 70% of that remaining people. Now, these are people who had heard of the Village Education Committee. 70% of them could not name a single member of the VEC. And this included people who were themselves members of the VEC. Right? So it is sobering, to say the least. But I think, some of the discussion that you must have had earlier, there's no question that the cost of acquiring this information is high, and that's where technology can come in. I mean, now that we have possibilities where people can first of all send information on their cell phones as to whether the doctor is in the clinic or not, but also receive information as to whether this clinic is one where the doctors are consistently in or out most of the time, can actually make things easier. You don't have to go to these town meetings and things like that. The third criticism, which also has some validity to it, is that we actually have limited evidence, real rigorous evidence, on whether these interventions work. That is, when you do an information intervention, when you do a citizen report card, or you disseminate the studies of absentee teachers, does it actually lead to better education outcomes? And again, I think there's a lot of romance around it. I mean, the citizen report cards, which started in Bangalore and spread like wildfire around the world, has never been rigorously evaluated in terms of outcomes. I would say that this work on participatory budgeting as well, where you get information out to citizens about their budgets, and they actually meet, or they can go on the web and they can actually discuss what they want. Sounds good. Sounds like a really powerful way of empowering poor people, but very little empirical evidence that it actually makes a difference. It might make a difference in the budgetary allocations, but it's very little evidence that it actually makes a difference in outcomes at the bottom line. And also, let me add that there's some disturbing evidence that there can be negative effects as well of information. It isn't the case that more information is always good or transparency is always good. And I think the most graphic example is this work by Yanagisawa on Rwanda, where he's actually looked at the use of hate radio during the genocide that actually sent information out there that incited groups that were otherwise not incited. And he estimates, I don't know, that something like 9%, that you could explain 9% of the genocide in Rwanda through the hate radio campaigns. Okay, now the fourth criticism, if you go down this list, is that even if you give poor people this information, and even if it's rigorous and robust and everything else, and even if they didn't know it before, what can they do about it when the whole system is geared and there are powerful forces that want those services to remain the way they are because there are people earning rents from it? You know, the absentee doctors in the clinics, they're actually making a lot of money in the private sector. That's why they're absent. They're doing private practice. Now, and they're actually very powerful politically with the local politicians. So you can give information out to these people to tell them how often the doctors are absent or how few medicines there are in the clinic, but so what? The politician will get elected and reelected because the doctors are running the campaigns, and the doctors want to do that because they can be absent from their jobs and continue to work in the private sector. So the key is it's not sufficient to just put this information out there. I mean, I think we have to be vigilant to say, can we use this information? Can we actually use this information to break some of that power, those power relationships? Because, why is it that these doctors, these politicians get elected and reelected? It's because there's really asymmetric information, right? There's the average citizen, and the average poor person, the average voter is poor, and they vote in higher numbers than the non-poor, and yet these politicians who are actually promoting policies that are discriminating against poor people get elected and reelected. So you've got a failure there. But one of the reasons is, coming back to my example of Champaben, my lady in Gujarat, is one of the reasons is that the voter doesn't associate the absentee doctor with a failure of public policy. It doesn't associate the missing medicines from the fact that people along the chain are stealing the drugs all the way down. Now, if we can use the information, the aid data and other information, in a way that is salient for that political discussion, in a way that actually strengthens the hand of the voter, the citizen as a voter, so that they can then bring some pressure to bear on the politician, then we might actually be getting somewhere. And there's some work being done, including some randomized control trials, trying to estimate it. But I think the key there, and this might be useful for those of you who are in the business, is let's think of the nature of the information, or think of classifying the information in a way that makes sense politically. We collect all this data and we usually disseminate it by, rural, urban, or this district and that district. How about by constituency of the politician? So you actually give the information in terms of the district that the politician comes from, and you can, in fact, even then track it over time. And there are ways in which you can do it. It makes people uncomfortable, but on the other hand, this is data. This is evidence. That's nothing. We're not making any statements, or we're not taking sides on this. We're just presenting the information, but we're presenting it in a smart way that can actually then empower people in a way that is politically salient, and then it might have an effect. So let me just stop there with those four. Thanks.